Read somewhere in, when I was reading about the novels that you had intended this book to actually be about the sun.
Exactly,
More, yeah.
yes.
So at what
Yeah.
point did the shift occur, you think?
It occurred, the original thing was Shiva, it's the age of
Right.
Shiva. And Shiva is often called the erotic ascetic.
Right.
He's called that because he withdraws from the world.
Right.
And since he's unavailable, people who love him are just filled with this intense longing for him because they
Right.
can't attain
They can't
him.
attain him.
And so I thought that, okay, there'll be a central Shiva-like character who would be the sun.
Right.
Ashwin, his name is in the
Right.
novel. And then there'd be three people who love him but can't really attain him in that same
That's right.
sense that they
That's
want.
right.
And there were these three different narrators. And I started writing about all of them. This was the first one, Meera.
Right.
And I also wrote about the other two narrators,
Right.
one of whom is his wife,
His wife.
later on, much
Right.
later. And then Meera just
You mean
became...
the son's wife? So
Yes,
it's
the
almost
son's
like
wife,
okay.
yes.
The book is not there, of course, doesn't exist in this book at
No,
all.
no.
Right,
I mean, I wrote a few hundred pages
Right.
about these other two narrators,
Right.
but then Meera's voice was so intense.
Right.
She basically at some point said, okay, get rid of the
Right.
other two people.
Right.
I am your heroine.
Right,
And
right.
it's not even about my son, it's about me.
It's about her.
So she just took over, and with her, the whole idea of what's going on in the background with
Right.
India's history,
Right.
that took over as well.
So I just wanted to sort of put, even though this first novel, The Vishnu, was written some years, as you said, 7 years
Right,
ago,
right.
I thought maybe we could sort of talk about the age of Shiva, but also sort of go back to
Sure,
the death of Vishnu.
absolutely.
So what was interesting to me in reading the two novels is the way in which the political, as you said, is much stronger an element, or part of this novel than in the Age of Vishnu,
Yes.
right? So in the Age of Vishnu, it seems to be more about, it's much more contained in that
Right,
sense.
right.
There's a building, there are the tenants, there are the people who live in limbo land,
Absolutely.
the landing. But by the end of the novel, you can see it bringing in politics, communalism, Hindu-Muslim tension. So, but when you were thinking about this novel, and you just said, even though it was her voice that took over, how did the politics, and what made you think about the incorporating this large fabric of India as it moves through independence all the way to Indira Gandhi?
Right.
How did you imagine, as you were crafting this fiction, what would be your links and your connections?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, first of all, with the death of Vishnu, I always conceived that as a snapshot.
Right.
So it was, in the 80s or 90s perhaps, and it gave you a snapshot of the country at that time.
Right.
And so the political situation was woven in, as you said,
Right.
especially towards the end,
Right.
Hindus and Muslims.
Right.
With the Age of Shiva, there were several things that came into play.
Right.
One was that I was trying to create a novel that was completely different.
Right.
So I
Right.
wanted something, much longer.
Right.
The first novel takes place in the course of one day.
Yes.
And it's, all these people
Right.
in this
Right.
one building.
Right. Right.
Here I wanted to move from Rawalpindi to Delhi to
Right.
Bombay.
Right.
I wanted it to be over several decades. And so the natural thing was to examine what's happening in the background. The political part really came in when I really saw that, here was a character, Meera, who's only about 17 at the beginning of the novel. And the country is only 7 years old at the
Right.
beginning of the novel.
Right.
And I said, it would be really nice to have this parallel track
Right.
where this very immature woman
Right.
is basically evolving
Right.
through these decades.
Right.
And in the background, you see how India is also evolving.
Right. Right.
From a very young country.
Right.
When I started the novel, I thought I'd write about the partition because my parents actually came from Rawalpindi during the
Right.
partition.
Right.
But then once I got to that, I said, well, there's so many other novels, so many great novels
Yes.
that have been written about
Right.
that.
Right.
Let's look at what happened a few years later.
Right.
Where these new ideas were springing up in India, where the first seeds of perhaps feminism,
Right.
of religious nationalism
Right.
as a political force
Right.
were being sown, and follow these things instead.
Right.
And so it was a very rich period, and it was natural
Right.
to weave these in.
Right.
I should just point out, though, that my mother is a history teacher, and history was always my worst subject. So it's only when I started reading up for this book
Right.
that I really got immersed in it and
Right.
just energized
Right.
by it.
Right.
And I said, okay, I need to put this in the book.